Crisis Radio, and this is Webster Tarpley reporting from Washington, D.C. And the latest news confirms the analysis we've been giving you here for 2 years. We are in a world economic depression of unimaginable proportions. We hear from the charlatans and quackademics over at the National Bureau of Economic Research, the top 150 quackademics. You remember them, the ones who struck out when it came to forecasting or predicting the Depression. They didn't warn against any of the abuses. They struck out now again when we got into this Depression. They were only able to call it a recession. They've struck out a third time saying that the recession is now over and has been over for several months. And, of course, the biggest strikeout of all, the thing that ought to get them thrown out of the game and sent to the showers, no inkling of an economic recovery program to get out of the Depression. So forget the entire academic, quackademic, charlatan economist profession. Be they monetarists, Austrians, be they Keynesians. It's the same wretched story. Keynesians a little bit better politically, but ultimately incapable of creating an economic recovery because they can't understand the importance of investment in capital goods and infrastructure. They see it all as consumer-led, so they're inclined to fritter everything away with stimulus programs that don't get you anywhere. A lot of projects that don't create anything. So we've got this depression. The big dramatic thing, of course, was on Thursday of this week, and that means, of course, Thursday the 19th of August, we had 500,000 people trooping to their unemployment centers to request unemployment insurance. So 500,000 new unemployment insurance claims in the previous week, and that's the highest since November of 2009. So the so-called double dip was always a fraud. You've been in a world economic depression the whole time, except just as in 1929 to 1933, it comes in waves, and there are ebbs and flows within the depression. There are momentary stabilizations followed then by new sickening lurches into the abyss. And remember, there's no cycle that lifts you out of this. Whatever those Austrian hacks may claim, there's no automatic cycle that lifts you out of it once you reach the bottom. The bottom is the bottom you make by changing policy, by going back to New Deal methods, proven, tried and true, road-tested, proven effective, and not these chimeras of Austrian ideology or indeed the Keynesian pump priming, which is being tried now to some extent and doesn't really work too well. We've also got other forms of evidence of the severity of the Depression. We've got the Obama's fake program to help people who are threatened by foreclosures on their mortgages. So the problem with this Obama mortgage program is that this was always a kind of a fig leaf for Wall Street. It was camouflage for the rapacity and greed and sociopathic fury of these Wall Street bankers who have securitized these mortgages and want to keep the cash flow coming. One half of the people who signed up for Obama's mortgage amelioration program, mortgage help program, have now dropped out of it because, of course, it's a fraud. It doesn't get you anywhere. It puts you at the mercy of these bankers. The only solution to foreclosures is to stop foreclosures, to declare a 5-year freeze, halt, moratorium on any and all foreclosures on somebody's primary residence. Within that framework, you can then negotiate. You can work out all sorts of deals. And I'm basing this on a New Deal measure. This is the Fraser-Lemke Act of the early 1930s, which was a 3-year freeze moratorium on a foreclosure if you could get any local court to come in and approve the freeze, you would stay in your home. And that meant that you had to show the judge that you were making every effort to pay and so forth, and you were not a speculator with 50 different residences, but you only had one, and so forth. So back to the New Deal, as just about always, right? There's always something in the New Deal that corresponds more or less to what's going on. The New Deal had two approaches. One was the Fraser-Lemke Act, which simply stopped all foreclosures for 3 years from the time they wanted to come after you. And then there was this question about compulsory mediation, that nobody could come in and kick you out of the house without going into forced mediation, which generally in about 90% of the cases led to the avoidance of foreclosure, because the banker was simply told, look here, you're going to have to write down the capital, the sum, the principal on this mortgage, because this house is simply not worth that. That was a bubble price. There were these real estate bubbles, of course, in the 1920s. You've probably seen the Marx Brothers in Coconuts about the Florida land boom. Well, that depression was preceded by a real estate bubble as well. Then we've got this story. It reminds me of some of the post-war Italian neo-realist movies, right? Rossellini and people like this. This is in Atlanta, Georgia. 445 slots, I think, in public housing become available, and 30,000 people show up. It's practically a riot. This reminds me of this movie, Rome, 4 o'clock, where there were 2 or 3 jobs announced in the paper, and 5,000 or 10,000 people show up, and it simply shows the failure of the ruling class, right? The masters of human destiny, the people in Wall Street who make these economic decisions, have struck out again so completely. Now, that leaves us with a real economy which is collapsing, and we'll get to the China angle on this. The best way to see how you're doing is to compare yourself to China. China has been getting a 9.5% yearly growth rate on average for the past 32 years. And anybody rational would say, well, let's study the Chinese and see what they're doing. And the short answer is, it ain't the Austrian school, it ain't von Hayek, it ain't von Mises, it ain't Keynes either. It's capital investment in industrial production and infrastructure, raising living standards, and so forth, even with all the problems in the Chinese model. We're not proposing the Chinese model. We're simply saying, let's look in there and cherry-pick the aspects that are effective. Of course, there is a problem that the living standards in China, for the vast majority of the peasantry, need to rise. But still, 9.5% growth over 1/3 of a century. It's the greatest economic miracle of modern times. It eclipses the German, Italian, and Japanese models after World War II. So China is passing the U.S. in manufacturing and all the rest of this. So the depression grows. China overtakes the U.S., and of course the Austrians and privatizer Ryan, of course, the spokesman for budget, fiscal, and economic matters of the reactionary Republican Party, and of course their dupes and thralls in the Tea Party, is talking about how we need to have more tax cuts for the rich. The whole debate in Washington is that the tax cuts for the rich, the exorbitant, grasping, rapacious, greedy top 1%, they want more. Remember, in 1978, the differential between the top 1%, Bush's base, and the bottom 1/5 of the U.S. population was 25-1 in terms of income. That was 1978 under Carter. God knows that was bad enough. As of 2007, that ratio is 75-1. So if you're in the top 1% today, you're making 75 times as much as the entire 20% at the bottom, the lower 1/5. This has to end. And in addition, we're getting signs of a new banking panic 2 years after September 2008. We'll be with you in a minute on that.